When you have the ability to do something and help others, like now's the time.
Welcome to the TroopHR Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Bradley. Today we're going to be discussing immigration. And this is one of those topics that lives at the intersection of policy, politics, and people. Depending on where you sit, this same policy shift can be seen as a great solution, a threat, or somewhere in between. For employers, especially in fast-moving industries, the implications are real. Visa delays, travel risk, and uncertainty for team members who are simply trying to do their jobs. To help us navigate this nuanced landscape, I'm joined by Matthew Hellrung, a partner at Matthew Hellrung, and an expert in employment-based immigration. Matthew's work spans everything from corporate visa sponsorship to pro bono support for refugees, giving him a uniquely balanced perspective on the human and business impact of immigration policy. But before we dive into policy, we first review the personal by asking Matthew, how did he get into immigration law?
I always wanted to become an attorney, I think. Reading and writing comes pretty easily to me. But specifically to immigration, I wanted to do something that was able to help people with my law degree. And doing business-based immigration, employment-based immigration, we also do a lot of pro bono and humanitarian refugee work, just a great opportunity to help companies and help individuals at the same time. So that's what really drew me to it. And I didn't even know this really was an area you could practice in when I was in law school. Kind of fell into it as I moved to Chicago, but really ended up enjoying it.
Now, a quick behind the scenes for law school. Is immigration an elective? Is that a core course you take?
It is. And in fact, I didn't take it. So I was much more focused on, I think, areas of corporate law, like corporate transactions, tax, contracts, litigation. And, graduating in the Great Recession, there just weren't very many opportunities for young associates, back in, 2011, I think now. So I'm aging myself a little bit there. I moved to Chicago, applied for a bunch of different jobs and really was intrigued by my first position, the first immigration law firm that I took at, because you get to help individuals and companies at the same time. I am a bit of an immigrant background. My grandmother's fresh off the boat from Germany. My mom's first generation, and one of my exes at the time was also a naturalized immigrant as well. So it was kind of all around me, but didn't really focus on it until after I got out of school. But you can take it as an elective in law school.
It's interesting that tax law, corporate tax law, was the more riveting thing that you were going after. But, everyone has their unique preferences, so I won't hold that against you. But we're glad that you chose this field, and you touched on one of the parts of it that was really interesting to me when I got into HR is how often we run into this field of immigration, but not just the regulations, right? For the regulations, for the legal side, we have folks like you, but it's the emotional toll that individuals go through and the uncertainty. If you can first start at this personal level, what are some of the stories, the feelings that you're seeing over the past few years?
For folks that don't deal with immigration every day, aren't hiring foreign nationals into their businesses, I would say outside of probably pay and the job itself, immigration sponsorship is, a top priority for individuals, making sure that they transition from a student visa to a work visa or from, intercompany transferee to a green card. It's always top of mind. And I think right now there's just a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, kind of an objective metric. We saw our email and inbound traffic as a firm, which we track, like double after basically since the election in November. So folks are very anxious about it. And the best thing that we try to do for our clients and for everyone that wants to listen is to try to put out good, solid information about what's actually happening on the ground versus sort of the sound bites that the administration puts out.
We had President Trump take office in January of this year, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things being said. What were some of the standout things that you saw take effect that started to change the way that visas and things like that were operating?
It's interesting because we had in a prior version of this, and Trump won from 2016 to 2020, I think it was 2017, 2021. We thought, in large part that they would follow kind of the same playbook, which was making, the particularly the work visa process and employment-based green card process more difficult, more costly, more time-consuming by issuing RFEs, upping fees, just kind of clogging the pipeline that is, work visas that are issued to folks, which are, almost 1 million each year, or green cards. This time around, they're taking a little bit of a different tact. We've seen them not really touch employment-based immigration as much as we thought they would. Now we're really seeing them focus on undocumented immigrants at the moment, which is a little bit of a shift. Certainly they were prioritizing deportation of undocumented immigrants in the first administration. It just seems to be someone in the administration, I'm not sure who, kind of had the president's ear on how important employment-based immigration is actually to the economy, and in particular technology and healthcare and sciences and AI. There are a lot of immigrants in those fields. I think if you look at the top 50 funded AI companies right now in the United States, I think something like 75% of them have at least one immigrant founder as part of them. And I would imagine if you pull that back to first generation immigrants, people whose parents came over and now were born here, it's probably all of them or close to all of them. So it's a little bit of a different playbook this time around. For instance, we are seeing stricter adjudications at the border, at the Canadian border. Canadians have a TN visa that's fairly easy to use to get across the border to work. There are specific categories that you must qualify for, or job buckets in the TN visa structure. And we're starting to see those adjudications become more difficult. And now, more often, we're seeing them placing more scrutiny on issuance of visas at U.S. consulates and embassies abroad, where for people that don't really know the process, you usually have to apply at the USCIS, get an approval, then you go to the consulate as an individual who's sponsored, get that visa stamp like an H-1B, come into the United States and start working. It's the issuance of the visa stamps, even after an approval at the USCIS, that we're most concerned about right now. And there's increased scrutiny. They're looking at social media posts, anything you have on your social media profiles, your LinkedIn. It's all game now as a rationale to deny you a visa.
In the HR field, one of the things that I've seen, and of course some colleagues I speak to, is as our team members who are on visas, active visas in the United States, they go to visit home, they go to travel for business, we're getting much more concerned from these individuals. To your point, when they are going back internationally through the border, there's a lot more scrutiny. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I do not want to get into legal advice because to our listeners, you are not their attorney. Mm-hmm. But what are some good practical tips for the individual, things they can do proactively to prepare for that type of travel?
Yeah, it's tough and it can be a little random sometimes. I think most importantly, understanding what your immigration history is. Customs and Border Patrol has a log of every single time somebody enters and exits the country as an immigrant. So they have notes on every single time you come through. Every time you get through customs, they can look that information up. Now, if you've been pulled into what's called secondary inspection in previous instances, you should expect probably to continue to be pulled into secondary inspection when you enter. Unfortunately, there's really no way around that. It's completely up to the patrol officer's discretion in that instance. They really have a lot of power, and it's based on national security, right? They can look through your phones, your laptops, pull you into secondary questioning, ask you additional questions. I think the most important things to stay prepared are, as I mentioned, know your immigration history. Make sure that you're aware of what's in your most recent work visa petition. If it's an H-1B, make sure that you review as an immigrant coming into the United States where your job location is in that petition. It should be accurate, obviously, if it's your home or an office. Make sure that you understand what your wage is, what your job duties are, and be mindful of your entries and exits and be ready to answer questions. The biggest thing that I advise clients most often is really just to be confident and then not share any additional information unless you're asked. Sometimes oversharing of information can lead to additional questions or inquiries or being pulled into secondary inspection. And believe me, I've been in the situation before where you get really nervous and you want to give them as much information as possible to prove to them you're telling the truth. Sometimes that can be detrimental though. And I would only answer the questions asked. Make sure you know your immigration history. Carry a copy of a work verification letter from your current employer. Usually you can get those pretty easily from the HR department. You might even want to carry a copy of your approval notice from your most recent petition just to be sure that you have all that stuff reviewed, that you're prepared. And I would honestly say just relax and answer the question that's asked. Although I know it is a very anxious situation to be in.
Sure. And as our individuals are going through our team members, if they run into a scenario where they are in a secondary inspection or having any kind of difficulty that was not planned for, is it they should know the attorney's number for the company immigration, or do they need their own immigration attorney?
If the work visa that you're entering on was filed by counsel for the company, certainly have the attorney that's representing the company, their number information available. In most cases, however, when you're in secondary inspection, you actually can't make a phone call. You're not entitled to representation in that instance, unfortunately, because it's a matter of national security and entering the country. And CBP can pretty much do whatever they want to you. They've even held, prominent civil rights lawyers and immigration attorneys in secondary inspection custody for, sometimes hours or days until they're getting questions answered or the person's ultimately released. So you should definitely talk to an attorney in general, an immigration attorney, specifically your company's immigration attorney if you're traveling, to make sure that you have all the proper documentation so they can review entries and exits to make sure there aren't any issues. But unfortunately, in that instance, and specifically in secondary inspection, you likely won't have the ability to make a phone call or have access to a phone in that situation. And that's where just being prepared comes into play, giving consistent answers, staying calm. CBP officers are individuals too. To some degree, they're just doing their job. It's their job to make sure that dangerous individuals are kept out of the country. Now, whether that's everybody they pull in a secondary inspection, most often not. But be humane, be respectful, be consistent, be calm in those interactions. And usually, in my experience, and more recently with our clients, we haven't really had anybody that's been what we call expedited removed. Which would be like them having you sign a piece of paper admitting you committed some type of immigration fraud by entering the country, and then they throw you out of the country right away without due process. And I will say, lastly, don't sign anything. Anything they put in front of you, do not sign anything. If you have to be there for days, unfortunately, make sure you don't sign anything, because usually that piece of paper they're giving you is admission of some type of fraud, which then gives them the ability to deport you out of the country without due process or an immigration court hearing. So it is tough. And we've even given clients advice, if you have like social media on your phone that you don't want them to search, or email access to your company email or personal, delete those apps off your phone, or perhaps don't even carry your phone with you on the plane. Ship it via mail to wherever you're going. We do that with laptops as well as a recommendation, because they have access to everything. And if they find something they don't like, especially in that particular position that you're in, it can be difficult to enter the country. You may get removed, unfortunately.
That's fascinating because it's crossing the borders. They can access anything on your computers or laptops. So
Yeah.
that's right.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's just we call an envelope of national security, which the Supreme Court kind of said in the first Trump administration, actually, they made a decision on that. That's the law, unfortunately. As lawyers, we try to do as much as we can to help clients, but I would always say, we're lawyers, not magicians. There are certain things that we just can't help with, or we can't be there or represent folks in person. Of course, we would love to, but CBP won't allow us.
And on the employer side, in the last few questions here, we just spoke about what the individuals can do to prepare.
Mhm.
And preparation sounds like a big part of it right now.
Mhm.
What about organizations? I get the sense of a lot of our audience are at small startups. They should not be doing these things on their own. Feels like a plug for you. They should be reaching out to immigration counsel that's well versed in that
Yeah.
in advance. But what else can HR teams do?
I think one is be prepared. I mean, secondarily, yes, if you are considering sponsoring individuals for work visas or green cards, and honestly, a lot of companies have folks on immigration benefits they didn't sponsor, like DACA, for example, or a dependent that's married to an H-1B holder that's working for you. If you have any of those folks in your employee population, I would just retain an attorney. Immigration we talked about tax earlier. Tax is the largest area of federal jurisprudence in terms of the amount of regulations and case law that's out there. Number two is immigration. It's just massive area to be specialized in. And even within immigration, I specialize in employment-based, investment-based immigration for entrepreneurs and tech companies and insurance companies and consulting companies and all that. But there is also family-based, which is a whole nother branch of immigration to practice. And then you have on the outside here, humanitarian, which is parole, refugee, DACA, a lot of the other statuses that are offered to folks that are coming from war-torn countries, civil war, endangered areas, and asylum as well, forgive me. So I think it's recognize that you're operating in a new normal. Make sure that you have competent counsel. Even if you're not like filing casework, you can execute an attorney-client agreement and they can bill you hourly for just questions that you're answering. I think also communicating to the employees as an employer that you have a plan, that we have counsel retained, we have an immigration policy, we are preparing our business to protect you, the employee, and your family. So because we value you as obviously a resource in the business and a teammate, a colleague. So I think clear communication about what the company is going to do to help prepare employees and their families through this difficult, 4 years or so. I think that's important as well. I mentioned it before, having an immigration policy written down, have procedures in place, communicate clearly to your employees, support them as much as you can, have counsel retained if you do have an issue. And it's not a bad time to review your policies. How are we completing I-9s? What does our immigration policy say about people when they get stuck abroad, for example, if they can't get a visa? How are we going to handle that? How do you handle that technologically? Are you going to have a VPN where they log into? Are there security issues if the person's stuck in China, for example, and can't get a visa there? So a lot of things to consider, but a good time, I think, before things potentially get worse is to review all of those policies and procedures to make sure that you're doing as best you can to comply.
I have two final questions as we come in for a landing. One's very tactical.
Sure.
Is if you have someone flying in or flying out of the U.S. for business, sounds like one, it'd be helpful for the HR team to know maybe travel plans. But say someone doesn't show up to the conference that they're supposed to speak at, does the business have the ability, or at least counsel have the ability, to reach out to, let's say, Boston Airport and say, is this person being detained?
Mm-hmm. We can. That's a question of whether they're going to answer or not. They're not necessarily required to, give out information of who they're currently detaining in secondary inspection or whatever else you'd like to call it. So it's possible. In most cases, it's best to try to reach out through local government or officials and things like that to get them to communicate internally with ICE, either on a federal level or state level or city level, to try to figure out where these individuals are. In situations like that, we're always reaching out, or the rationale that we use is this individual has children, they have family, they're just concerned. Where is this person? They were supposed to land, they were supposed to be here at this time, and now no one's heard from them. So at least, in most cases, CBP may, answer anything that yes, we are holding the person. We won't release any more details at this time, unfortunately. So it's really tough, but they don't have to tell you, unfortunately, because again, it's a matter of national security. So it's really up to their discretion.
And final question for you, it's a two-parter, so I'll do a little bit of a cheat here, is one, a lot of things happening, right? A lot of things that some are excited about, some are very anxious or upset about, but what keeps you going on a daily basis and supporting all these folks? And then if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
When you have the ability to do something and help others, now's the time. This is why we became immigration attorneys. This is why I love this area of practice. You get to help people. I see it as a challenge. I'm very competitive as an individual by my nature. So if you want to challenge me, let's go. We're ready. We have a firm of 30 people, 10 attorneys. We are ready to go. Folks are really empathetic and compassionate and really grateful for the help in most cases, even though they are stressed out or have a lot of anxiety around the situation. So that's always really gratifying. It is tough though. You do get tired. I really focus on telling my staff, take vacations, take breaks. You're going to get burnt out from all this. It is a marathon. You can't expect to be running sprints, for the next 4 years. You won't make it. So take it day by day, relax. There are a lot of things being said that aren't actually being done, as you mentioned before, on the ground. I think that's the way that we deal with it. And obviously, the ability to help clients, I think, is a privilege, especially during this period of time. I also want to just remind everyone that immigrants are so vitally important to industry in the United States and to business and our success. As I mentioned before, the top 50 AI companies, something like 75% of their founders are immigrants. To give you some raw statistics, and what frightens me most, honestly, I would say, is the pipeline of students that may dry up coming into the United States. Universities are very concerned about that as well because they usually pay full tuition. So that's a financial issue on top of being, I would say, a moral one. But about 25% of students graduating from STEM bachelor's degree programs in the United States are international students coming in from abroad to come to our universities. At the master's degree level, it's about 40% of individuals that are receiving master's degrees in a STEM area are international students. And then at the PhD level, it's almost 50%. We are a knowledge innovation economy, and a lot of that knowledge and innovation is coming from international or immigrants that are coming to the United States and creating this value. Long term, if we turn these folks away, especially after they've gone to school here, we're just creating companies in other countries to compete against our own, right? You see in the rise of technology companies in India and China, a lot of those folks went to the school in the United States and now are competing against us. So I think we have a national interest as well as a moral one to continue to keep our doors open for individuals coming to the United States and to help the country grow and continue to innovate. Your second point, if you want to get a hold of me, meltzerhellrung.com, MELTZERHELLRUNG.com is our website. we have a contact us. You can click that. Within 24 hours, we will reach out and schedule a consultation, depending on what your immigration issue is.
Amazing. Matthew, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I learned so much today.
Thank you, Taylor. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the TroopHR Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. If you would like to learn more about our community, please visit TroopHR.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.